Kia ora, hello, my name is Jason Pemberton. I'm from Christchurch, New Zealand, and I was involved with a youth mobilisation initiative called the Student Volunteer Army that started up after a series of earthquakes that we had in Christchurch through 2010 and 2011. So the Student Volunteer Army started initially as a Facebook event after our first earthquake. It came at an interesting time. It was the end of our equivalent of spring break. The earthquake struck on the Sunday, and the immediate response from our university was that campus was closed, and it was going to stay closed for probably 3 weeks while they had to reassess all the buildings. So there were kind of two major responses from the student community. The first one was partying and celebrating because there was no class, and then the other side was this mucking out and helping. So we recognised that there was an enormous amount of liquefaction silt that had boiled up out of the ground, and lots of wide-ranging damage and things happening. So the Student Volunteer Army mobilised as just a group of individuals trying to go out and help, just knocking on doors, asking how we could help, shoveling, doing all those sorts of things. The movement grew quite quickly over the first few days and got quite a lot of media attention, and then we carried on back into the academic year, finished our studies for the year, and we walked into our new academic year and had the largest of our earthquakes on the second day of our academic year in 2011. It was 22nd of February 2011. That was a 6.3 earthquake. The epicenter was almost directly under the centre of our city, 350,000 people in Christchurch. It was only 5 kilometres deep, which is very, very shallow for an earthquake of that scale, and so the result was enormous damage. 80% of the buildings within our central city are being demolished. 80% of the underground infrastructure in terms of water, sewage, wastewater, anything you can think of has all been damaged. 186 people lost their lives that day, and there was the equivalent of about the weight of the Empire State Building worth of liquefaction boiled up out of the ground. Hundreds of thousands of tons of mud boiling up through people's gardens, through people's yards, into their garages, whole houses sinking into the mud. So the Student Volunteer Army mobilised again as part of a wider, reasonably well-coordinated effort with emergency services. So we were dealing with a lot of non-critical response work that needed to be done, usually things that there weren't existing solutions for. So the nature of our emergency and the time was that there were problems like we have whole communities of older people who are very, very independent with mobility scooters, and they live very independent lives. When the power goes out and they run out of battery and things like that, you've got a whole community of people who suddenly become very, very vulnerable. Now that problem has never really had to be dealt with before in that sort of way, and so existing organisations started turning to us and saying, can you help? And so we ended up with a group of about 11,000 largely unskilled volunteers, just everyday people with whatever experience you happen to have, going out and doing whatever they felt they could do to help in whatever way they wanted to. So really SVA as an organisation was more of an enabling platform. It was a brand that gave people permission to do what seemed to be right, and there was accountability to each other. We'd always be in groups of 5 to 15, and the decision-making processes were very nimble, very much focused on the ground, and we had 0 injuries, 0 reports of negative incidences, 0 theft or any. Essentially, the distributed leadership structure fundamentally worked in that it meant we were able to be very responsive and nimble and dynamic and respond to things very, very locally. But it had enough structure that there was internal accountability and there were no issues. It really was just an incredible movement and an incredible time to be involved with. So we ended up responding to 4 major earthquakes in Christchurch over 18 months, and a few secondary responses. We did some work in Japan after their tsunami. A couple of us went over there and worked with some local students from Tokyo who were travelling up north. We did some work in New York after Hurricane Sandy, and we've consulted in a number of different countries as well, doing various things, essentially on information sharing and collective impact, looking at how we can work better together to achieve what we're trying to achieve. So a lot of that work over the last 5 years has kind of led us down a few different directions. The organisation itself has gone into different places, and those of us who were key at the start of it have more or less all walked away from the organisation and gone into different things. And what we've found is that the experiences that we had as a group of individuals, a group of young, now deemed young leaders, but we were just a group of young people doing what seemed to be the right thing to do. It kind of gave us the sense of, well, actually, if you know what you're trying to achieve and you have an understanding of the resources at your disposal, then really you can kind of just do things. You can kind of just do things. And so, we've all ended up going in different directions. Very few of us are involved with emergency management at all, but all of the things that we do have essentially taken those lessons and those principles, I guess, and we've woven them into the work that we do every other day. And for me, where I've ended up is I sit very much in the social enterprise community in Christchurch, and the way that we talk about things is how can we do business that does good, fundamentally. It's not about specifically disaster preparedness. It's not necessarily about specifically environmental or social causes or economic causes. It's about all of those things. And how can we design movements or initiatives or organizations that are fit for their purpose and transparent and clear to their purpose, and make people, or help support people, enable people to have amazing lives in the process. So that's the direction that I've gone, and I see it as a design challenge. Anything that we're trying to achieve, as long as you understand what you're trying to achieve, the rest is just a design challenge. And if you press yourself into time constraints or resource constraints, or you get too invested in what you're trying to do, then it can make things a lot more difficult. Whereas having that clarity of the broader picture, what are we trying to achieve in this ecosystem of things, wonderfully, powerfully positive things can happen.